Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Bonney Weekly podcast. And it is definitely weekly now. This will be the third one in a row that we've managed to get out on time. Today, we are going to have a look at something that I nearly got caught up in. IPP sentences. IPP means imprisonment for public protection. They were brought out early in the 2000s by the Labour government. And what it was, essentially, it seems like a good idea on paper. So it's for repeat offenders who pose a serious risk to the public. And so people that might be getting caught up in 4, 5 and 6 year sentences all the time, or, they keep coming in and out for, violent offences, but you can't really sort of throw them away for life. And they keep offending and they keep going back out, don't seem to be learning really. And that is textbook me. So between 2000 and 2005, I'd been in and out of prison plenty of times. And it was for the same stupid offences, robbing drug dealers and violence and that sort of thing. And when I sat there in the police cells, I saw my solicitor and he came and saw me and said that I qualified for one of these IPP sentences. And because it was my third strike for violence, it was almost a certainty that I was going to get it. And it's indeterminate. There's no end date to it. So you literally have a tariff, like a life sentence, and you have no release date. I was terrified, and especially for my sentence, it wasn't even the worst thing I'd done. I just chased someone around with a hammer, and as bad as that sounds, I didn't hit anybody. I didn't actually hit anybody. I hadn't punched anyone. I hadn't beaten anyone up. I joked that wasn't even the worst thing I'd done that week. But this is what I was going to get put away for potentially, I would have been looking at a 5 or 6 year IPP, and I could have quite possibly been in there for at least 12 to 15 years while I had to demonstrate that I wasn't going to be a risk to the public. And that would have been very, very difficult for me to demonstrate because I'd broken every bit of trust I'd ever been given. So there was no backbone for me to stand there and go, well, I've learned my lesson, I should get out now. Because I'd said that every time. And every time I'd basically screwed the system over. So, yeah, I was looking at a long time in prison. And there are still people in there now. So some of the stats I'd got from online, at the moment, there are in total 2,892 IPP prisoners in prison. Okay, this was as of December 2022, so about 6 months ago. Yeah, there were 2,892 inmates on an IPP. 1,400, or just under 1,500 of those are back on licence. So they've got out and they've breached their licence conditions and they've been sent back in. 1,394 of them are just in there because they've passed their dates. So they've basically done their tariff and they're just waiting for release. All but 35 of them. So there's 35 of them haven't even made their date yet. But the rest of the 1,394 have passed their date and they're just waiting to be released, or trying to prove that they're worthy to be released. Now, I want to give you a couple of instances of how these sentences were good and bad. So someone like me, it was the wake-up call that I needed because basically it's kept me out of trouble ever since. I have been in a position now where I know that I've got one strike left. So I'm on my second strike for violence, and I know I'm on my third strike, and I don't even want to ask them whether a life sentence is still on the table. They did say to me that if I was ever a threat to the public again, they would throw me away for life. So I have basically stayed good, made sure that everything I did, if I did cross the criminal line, was not violent or a threat to the public. I'm more of a threat to myself these days. But essentially I've just made sure I've not been violent and not been a threat to the public. So this sentence hanging over me, and if I'd known that sentence was hanging over me before I'd commit my offences, I probably wouldn't have gone chasing drug dealers around with a hammer. I probably would have done it very differently. But one of my pals, he did get out recently. He was basically in there for threats against his girlfriend. So he likes to drink. He has a problem with drink, and him and his girlfriend were having a up and down relationship. And he, while drunk and they'd fallen out, he made the mistake of ringing her up and sort of making threats against her. And he said, "Look, I'm gonna fucking kill you." And that isn't a good thing at all. And the timing couldn't have been worse as well, because in the media there had been a prisoner who threatened to kill his girlfriend using a prison phone. He got out, and within a week of getting out, he killed her. And that had happened within a couple of weeks of this offence. So my pal basically had made the phone call. She was recording him because she wanted to basically play it back to him and say, "Look, when you're drunk, you're a real arsehole." So yeah, she'd made the recording. She had got this threats to kill on tape. And in the mental state she was in, she went straight to the police and said, "Look, he's threatening to kill me." He got banged up. She then over the next couple of days was like, "Oh no, this isn't what I wanted. He's a bad guy. He's done a bad thing, but he's not a bad guy." And she retracted her statement. But the police still had the recordings. They were like, "No, we're running with this." And he ended up, I don't remember exactly what his tariff was. I think it was about 5 or 6 years. But he ended up doing a long time. He ended up doing sort of almost like 10 years away. And the problem is that he was still with the girl. So his girlfriend, who he threatened to kill, stood by him. And they had a kid together, and she would come up and visit him. And she supported him the whole way through the prison sentence. Now, because he didn't agree with the crimes, he refused to do any courses or anything like that. So, he just basically sat there and waited to be released. And, that ended up with him being there for a long, long time. Now, it's a difficult one, because who's to say that his behaviour wouldn't have got worse? Who's to say that, the police didn't stand in and do the right thing? Because a lot of domestic abuse victims do retract their statement, and they do kind of stand by their man or woman. We saw with Caroline Flack. She did a very similar thing. She was accused of beating her boyfriend with a lamp, I think it was. He phoned the police and said, "No, she's trying to kill me." And they had obviously the tape recording from the phone call, and they had the injuries that happened to him. So over the next couple of days, very similar. Caroline Flack's boyfriend tried to retract the statement. The police weren't having any of it. Crown prosecution used that evidence to try and prosecute her, and she ended up killing herself. Now, the steps, obviously are very similar. Domestic abuse victims often retract their statements. So it was, the police and the Crown Prosecution Service were, doing the right thing in their eyes in both cases. So my friend ended up in prison on an IPP, and he didn't get out for a very long time. Even in the they were protecting her from him, but she was already standing by him. She didn't really need protecting, or so they felt. Now, one of the instances where the IPP was probably used in absolute perfection was a story, and I don't know, I've probably told this story before, but it's one of the worst. Well, he's in there with some of the worst sex offenders that I came across in prison. Now, while I was on remand for my life sentence trial, I got a job as a gym orderly in Exeter Prison. Now, basically, the gym orderlies run the gym. We take weight sessions, we have to do inductions, we referee football matches, that sort of thing. And we also have to do that for the protection wing as well. So the sex offenders, the paedophiles, the debtors, the people who are scared. Now, it's difficult, but we have to do it. It's part of our job. And you take the rough with the smooth, as you do a lot of times with a lot of things in prison. A lot of people will be like, "No, fuck that. I couldn't work with the sex offenders. You couldn't pay me enough, or you couldn't give me enough gym to have to spend any time with them." And I get it. For me, it's the pinnacle of being in prison. It's the top job in prison. There's very few jobs that for me give me the amount of sport I wanted, give me the amount of food I wanted, because we had a bit of extra food. And also it gave me on the main wing, because obviously everyone wants to be your friend when you're a gym orderly because they want to get more gym. So, my laundry was done on time. I'd get extra food at the servery. Everything was going my way because of the job I had. And I was out of my cell. Exeter prison is a really, it's got a lot of bang up. And, it gave me the most time out of my cell. I was out all the time because I was always down the gym. But the rough side of that, the flip side of the coin, was that you had to take sessions for the nonces. You'd have to do gym inductions for them. And the way would I look at it is, they're not all sex offenders. So I would, when you're taking a group of like 5 to 10 of them for a gym induction, you don't have to be best mates with them. You just have to tell them what all the equipment does. But there was one guy in there that I'll always remember. And he had been caught climbing into a child's window. He got stuck in the bedroom window. All right, it was a downstairs building, and he'd got stuck in the window. Now, this was at a time as well when very recently, around that time, there had been there had been an abduction where basically this mother had left her kid in the bath, and this nonce basically snuck in, snatched the kid out the bath, and took it down the road and abused it. Right out from underneath the noses. These, some of these nonces are audacious in their criminality. It was a really disturbing and disgusting case. But this lad I'm talking about, he had basically got stuck in this kid's bedroom window, and again another downstairs window. And the only thing they could arrest him for was burglary or attempted burglary, because they didn't have any evidence of him doing anything else. He just basically got stuck in the window. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being a father or a parent and coming in and seeing this skinny little wretch? He wasn't even that old. He was just over 18. A skinny, fucking degenerate looking thing. And they knew full well what he was going to do, because when they went to go and search his house, he had newspaper cutouts of Ian Huntley, the abuser and the sex offender, paedophile, all over his wall. So, where the rest of us grow up having footballers and pop stars and, Rachel Stevens on our walls, this guy had a fucking paedophile. He had all his cuttings on the wall and sort of worshipped him like an idol. And then he went out and tried to commit a crime himself, very similar to what Ian Huntley did. Well, that's what they believed anyway. So they gave him an IPP sentence, and I hope he's still in there. I really do. One of my regrets, and obviously I didn't do it because I was on remand for my violent offences. So I didn't feel like at the time that I was in any position to bust this nonce's head open. But one of my regrets is that I didn't drop weights on his head while we were doing a gym induction, because I could have quite easily. When we're doing the bench press, I could have said, look, you come over here, help me out with this. We could have put some weights on the bar. And then I could have just picked up the bar and dropped it on his head. A couple of about 100 kilos or so of weight dropping on his fucking forehead would have sorted the problem out. And the world wouldn't have missed him. But, I was already fighting a life sentence as it was. I wasn't in any position to put on my cape and make my situation any worse. But yeah, that's a couple of instances of possibly where an IPP has been dished out for the right reasons, and then possibly my other friend, an IPP, wasn't always the best course of action. But who knows what could have happened? With my friend, if he'd carried on going down that path, would he have done something bad? Was the IPP a good step in there? So it's quite interesting. It was brought out again, like I say, by the Conservatives, by the Labour Party, to try and do something about the swelling prison population and the people just coming in and out and committing violent offences. But it wasn't always perfect, and there's still a lot of people in there now, still struggling under these IPPs. So I spotted an article a few days ago that just highlighted really what these IPPs are all about, and the suffering of some people that are still in there. So I'll just read this article out. A man from Bracknell who was jailed under the abolished IPP scheme almost 20 years ago, has been refused parole. Luke Ings is serving an indeterminate sentence for a robbery that he committed when he was 17 years old. He was ordered to serve a minimum of 18 months. So he got an 18-month tariff, and he's been in there for 20 years. Mental. Absolutely mental. You wouldn't, he could have murdered someone and got this time, but he hasn't. He committed a robbery. I don't know the circumstances of his robbery, but he's still there now. Now aged 35, his family and local MP says he has more than served his time and needs more support for his autism. Jeez. However, Mr. Ings was refused parole at his hearing this week, and it's understood he's going to appeal the decision. Luke's mother, Sam Ings, told ITV News, "I'm not a parent who'll say that my little boy didn't do wrong. He did do wrong, but he's been punished for it. 18 months, yes, not 18 years. No child deserves to come in at 17 and come out at 37. It's just not fair. It's not just unfair on him, but it's unfair on all of them. There was a sentence put on them that should never have been put on them. It took all their liberties, all their lives away from them." And then it goes on to say about IPPs, basically. The IPP sentence was abolished more than a decade ago, but hundreds of prisoners are still subject to them, thousands we've seen. Those serving an IPP can only be released once they are deemed no longer a risk to the public. Several incidents have occurred during Luke's imprisonment which have prevented his release. But his family say that this is because of his autism and claims he is not receiving the support he needs in jail. Basically, public protection must be their priority, the parole board and the parole system. But it's just not working. And it didn't work from the beginning. All it did was fill up the prison system, because essentially you've got now a load of parole prisoners in there who need to go in front of the parole board, way more. And you saw he got an 18-month tariff. So this doesn't mean that I don't know the circumstances of his robbery, but if you get 18 months for robbery, that isn't a bad robbery. I got 4 years for mine, and it wasn't even that violent. So I haven't looked into his case, but it doesn't seem like he deserves to be there for all the time he has. And obviously, being autistic, being in prison, it's very, very difficult. It's his needs must be quite challenging. But yeah, that's just another case of these lads in there. He's been in there for 20 years. That's the sort of time that serious armed robbers, murderers, serious criminals are getting. And that's without knowing the circumstance of his robbery, I don't think he robbed any trains or anything. He just really likes trains. Moving on to something a little bit lighter. Now, I keep going back to the reason I started these podcasts. It was because a comedian, Matt Price, came to talk to me. We did an episode of his podcast called Conversations with Criminals. It is fantastic. Go and listen to him. They're insane. There are some great ones on there. My one is the one called Picking Up Dead Rats. We've got a little two-parter out of him. And we were talking about the way that people get drugs into prison. And he was impressed that obviously there was so much ingenuity in how people get drugs into prison. And it is a full-time sport. And I saw another article, funnily enough, again coming out of ITV, and it was saying about HMP Bristol and saying it was one of the most unsafe prisons in England and Wales. And, whenever you read these reports, it basically just reads the same. So I'll read out the article again. It says here, a damning report has described HMP Bristol as one of the most unsafe prisons in England and Wales. An unannounced inspection earlier this month found that levels of violence against both inmates and staff were higher than most other prisons in the country. But again, they always say that, don't they? It's every report starts like that. A report released on Friday, 28th of July, said that almost half of detainees said that drugs were readily available, and there have been 8 suspected suicides in the past 10 months in prison. Now, that's been the same as every prison I go to. There's not one prison that I've been to where you couldn't go and get whatever drug you wanted, and it's just getting easier. A murder case is also ongoing after an inmate was found dead in the prison in June. The report said that the prison was violent and riddled with drugs, some of which were delivered by drones in through the cell window. in which inmates had removed the glass under the noses of the prison officers. Now, drones weren't around when I was in jail. We had to do it the old-fashioned way. There were a couple of members of staff that would bring stuff in. There were other methods, sort of bringing it in through the post that we could do, or we just did the old-fashioned way of sort of getting it thrown over the wall in the middle of the night. I remember one time at Exeter, it was winter sort of time, and this big parcel of drugs. It's not easy to get stuff thrown over the wall at Exeter because there's regular patrols. There's you don't get near the wall that often. The exercise yard obviously is against the wall, but it's watched. So, and there's a lot of people about. But one of the lads basically managed, as we were going out to the gym, this lad managed to get some drugs thrown over the wall, and he had to quickly run up, go and grab them, and come back again into the queue. It was quite a big parcel as well. But it was, it's coming in all ways and means. And now drones are so cheap and available. It's very, very easy to just tie parcels. You don't need say if you're getting in heroin or something, you don't need a massive parcel. Just something that's the size of a very, very small, like a tape cassette or something like that, and get it tied to the bottom of a drone. Most of the drones you can buy online for less than 50 quid would fly that up there. And you don't even need the drone back. You just need to fly it, kamikaze it into the prison, and then walk away, and then you have delivered your drugs. It's so easy these days. The story I was talking about, the picking up dead rats, because it was in Guy's Marsh, the outside cleaners basically going and picking up all the different bits and pieces outside the prison, all the rubbish and stuff, just trying to keep the prison looking slightly nicer. The boys would throw dead rats over filled with drugs, because the staff aren't going around picking up dead rats. It would be the inmates, and they'd throw it into a bin bag, and they'd walk off, and then they'd cut open the rat and get the drugs out. So that was the title of my podcast. It was just an interesting one this week. I saw a couple of bits in the news and just wanted to talk about my IPP and what other lads are going through. There are still people in there now, over 1,000 of them still serving a sentence. Thank you very much for listening again. Obviously, Lucy Letby still has not been sentenced or has not been found guilty or innocent. So we will come back and we'll do a whole episode about that when it's ready. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. Like, subscribe, do all of the things that YouTube likes, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.